Okay, so, so in class on Wednesday last week, if I remember correctly, we were in the middle of our discussion of the three sociological perspectives, right? So in your notes someplace, the last major topic that we discussed in our notes, the last major heading is three sociological perspectives, or maybe we used the word theoretical perspectives. Either one is fine. Okay, so we have three of these. The first two, I think, did we cover the first two? Okay. Okay, so the first two, what's the first one called? The first one called?
Functionalism.
Functionalism, thank you. Functionalism, oops. Functionalism, is it micro or macro?
Macro.
It is macro. Somebody give me a really quick little synopsis. What's the background? What's the basic idea behind functionalism?
That society basically works out the way it's supposed to.
Society basically works out the way that it's supposed to for what?
For system education, and government.
So there's parts of society that work together the way they're supposed to, but for what purpose? Stability, order, security across the long haul, right? Across century after century after century. Okay? So so functionalists look at stability, they look at order, they say, I heard one of you, I don't remember which one of you, and thank you all for contributing to that, but I don't remember who said it's a system, or like the thing you listed, like education system, all these kinds of things, right? So functionalists look at society as a system, like the human body is a system. So when you were listing education system and government and economy and family, whichever of those parts of society that we discussed last week, all those parts of society think about society like a human body. Human body has lots of different parts that work together for stability and order over time, right? If you're sick, you need medicine to get yourself well again. Right? So a functionalist looks at society as a system just like an animal or a human body is a system. It's got heart, lungs, blood vessels, muscles, etc. A functionalist looks at society like that. So all those different parts of society that we mentioned in class, the social institutions, you should have that term in your notes. All those social institutions are the different parts of the body, of society, just like all your organs are the parts of your body. Okay? And we even use that word in medicine, don't we? Somebody's stable, if they're healthy or if they're on the right track. Yeah, okay, so there's another like body metaphor or simile, or what is it if you say something is like or as something? Is it a simile? I never, like I said before I started the video, I'm not an English teacher, so I don't remember. I remember the word simile. I don't know if this is a metaphor or simile. We'll say that that's what it is. Okay. So anyway, society is like a human body, because human body has parts, society has parts too. Stability and order is the ultimate goal of a society to survive. That's what a functionalist would say. Good. Anything else we need to know? Just a quick and dirty recap of functionalism. What else do you have in your notes about it?
Crime and poverty and dirty jobs.
Oh, okay, yes. So we looked at concepts like crime and poverty, which don't necessarily seem like happy, stability, order kind of contributing parts of society, right? But does a functionalist find a way to analyze these things so that we can find the way that it helps keep society stable and orderly? Yes. So even though, we looked at education system, for instance, we looked at that, and okay, education system helps keep society stable and orderly over time because we have a norm in the United States where we want everybody to have at least a high school education. So the trend across the board, remember macro scale is about trends across the board, not unusual circumstances, okay? So for instance, some people have super skills like LeBron James and gets a job, wonderful job right out of high school, right? Is that the trend across the board, what happens for all of us? Sadly, no. So we can't really use LeBron James's lifestyle, as an example of how macro-scale social forces affect an individual, because that's an unusual, bizarre circumstance that does not happen very often. So macro-scale issues, we look at trends across the board in society that affect the vast majority of people. So we have a norm in society. We want everybody to have basically a high school education. Does everybody? Does the vast majority? The vast majority does, right? Certainly there are some who don't. We have safety nets called the GED, for instance, to try to catch you if you didn't get and not everybody gets the GED, right? But we're not talking about those unusual circumstances. We're talking about norms and trends across the board that contribute to stability and order of society moving forward. So like with poverty and crime, the existence of those two things really contributes significantly to the economy. It's really a great moneymaker for society that those two things exist. Poverty, for instance, a functionalist would say, contributes to the fact that we have workers who are willing to take those dirty jobs or that grunt work that's vital for stability and order of society, but none of us like to do it. Somebody's got to do it, though, because it's vital for stability and order of society. So a functionalist would say that kind of inequality between wealth and poverty ensures society is stable and orderly across the long haul. Does that make sense? Okay. Great, thank you. Now, what's the next one? Conflict theory, thank you. Conflict theory should be the next one in your notes. What's another term, another phrase that you can use for conflict theory? So, social conflict theory, you should always think of haves or have-nots. But yes, what I was looking for was social conflict theory, because I want you to be familiar with both ways of referring to this. I will try to always refer to it as conflict theory, but sometimes in some of the reading that you'll do, especially if you Google a topic or something like that, you'll see social conflict theory. I don't want that to confuse you. Sometimes when you Google functionalism, you'll see structural functionalism. Okay, same thing. Okay, so conflict theory, is it macro or micro? Macro, excellent. And what does it say about society's structure? What does it say about social structure?
Social structure has evolved over time to benefit the haves and disadvantages of the have-nots.
That's right. So social structure, the conflict theorist looks at the macro scale, okay? So we're looking at social structure across the board. They say that social structure benefits the people who we call the haves, large group of people we call the haves. They're in control, they have power, they have money, they have influence, they have voice in politics. However, whatever have you want to attribute to the haves, they have rights and privileges. Whatever they have, they benefit because conflict theorists say social structure is designed to benefit them, and social structure is designed to give disadvantages, roadblocks, to the have-nots. Do you want to look at wealth and poverty? There's haves, have-nots. Do you want to look at citizen undocumented? There's haves, have-nots. Do you want to look at males, females? There's haves, have-nots. Adults, children, haves, have-nots. Okay? Who has the majority of rights, and why can't a 12-year-old who's perfectly capable make their own decisions? Because they lack power. Okay, according to the social structure. Okay? Your 12-year-old brother should not make his own decision. Not every 12-year-old, right? Okay. So, what else do we need to know about conflict theory or social conflict theory? The haves or have-nots, these two, think of these as names for what we call categories of people. Here is another term that you need to add to your notes right now if we didn't do it on Monday or Wednesday. Did we do it on Wednesday? Do we have categories of people? Okay, so let's make sure that we understand what categories of people are. Categories of people are huge numbers of people across a population who share similar life experiences because they have characteristics in common. Categories of people. So a minute ago, I rattled off some different categories of people who could be the haves versus the have-nots. Wealth, poverty. Haves versus have-nots, two different categories of people. Does everybody who's in poverty in the whole United States know each other? No, of course not. That's a ridiculous suggestion. But do people who are in poverty, say in Utah and Colorado and Kansas and Missouri and all in any number of states, any number of cities, do they have similar life experiences because the structure of our society is set up in a way that they need money for certain things, and if money is lacking, then they have similar life experiences of lacking resources? Okay, I see some heads shaking. Affirmative, yes, affirmative is the answer. So they have similar life experiences. If you are impoverished here, and you're impoverished there, there's not a club, there's not a Facebook group where you can go on and connect with each other, but your life experience is probably pretty similar to others who are in your same financial category, okay? It's like wealthy people. Not every wealthy person knows each other, but if you're wealthy, you have a certain life experience that's probably very similar to other people who are in wealth, okay? Categories of people, you can break it down by race, you can break it down by age, you can break it down by your sex category, you can break it down by your financial category, you can break it down by your, well, I said age already, but anyway, categories of people, huge numbers of people across the board of society. They don't know each other. It's huge portions of the population that are categorized because they have similar social characteristics in common. Think of that as the haves or have-nots. When you're categorizing people based on inequality between them, the names of those categories are haves or have-nots. What else about conflict theory do we need to review? Do conflict theorists want to just simply identify where inequality is and just leave it alone? Say, oh, there it is, look at it. And just leave it alone? What do they want to do? They want to resolve it. They want to fix it. They want to find some kind of way where we can bring the haves or have-nots closer together so that there's not as huge of a discrepancy or no discrepancy at all is like the ideal situation for a conflict theorist. Okay? Any questions or anything? Sounds like where we ended it on Wednesday. Okay, so we have one more theory. Everybody finished with this and I can erase? Alrighty. So the first two theories or perspectives that we've gone over, remember, a perspective is just a way of looking at something. I did not tell you this one is true and factual and this one is true and factual. They are very different ways of looking at the same thing. Social structure at the macro scale. You come up with very different conclusions. You ask very different questions about whatever thing you're studying based on whether you use the functionalist theory or the social conflict theory. You ask different questions, you come to different conclusions while looking at the same exact thing. Like poverty, for instance. Poverty is part of the unequal system of the social structure in the United States according to a social conflict theory. Theorists, we need to get rid of it. Why should you be poor and somebody else not? Or vice versa. We need to get more equality financially between us is the point of view of a conflict theorist. A functionalist, what's their point of view about poverty?
It's like a benefit
you got to have it. A functionalist says you've got to have poverty. Who's going to do the grunt work? Not only who's going to do the grunt work, but poverty creates jobs for other people, because I have a job helping you make your life easier in poverty.
It all works out in the end.
That's kind of all works out in the end. You could kind of say that that is, yeah, a functionalist point of view. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
So functions, they don't try to alleviate poverty.
No. A functionalist does not propose to alleviate poverty. A functionalist does not say, let's stamp out poverty so people aren't hungry in the future. No, because poverty, what a functionalist would say in general is poverty is part of the social system. And since we haven't cut it out, like we would cut out a tumor or something in a body if it was causing trouble, right? Since we haven't cut out poverty from our social system, it's got to be because other parts of our social system have built up around it and it supports a stable, orderly society moving forward. How is that possible? And they could come to a conclusion such as the dirty jobs issue and make sure that grunt work gets done in society. And also, like charitable organizations, governmental agencies, social work, all kinds of money-making and service-oriented industries have an industry to begin with because they assist people in poverty. So some people are getting a paycheck and living a middle-class lifestyle because they have a job helping impoverished people. Where would that job go if there wasn't poverty anymore? Is kind of the question, or the synopsis, is that the right word for how a functionalist would look at this? Okay, any other questions? Okay, so the third theoretical perspective, number 3, is called symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism. It is a micro-level theory. It's a micro-level theory. So we get to be on the you and me level now. We don't have to start with trends across the board. We can start with the you and me level and look at these 2 root words here to get a really good hint, or to remind yourself really easily about what this theory is all about. This theory is about communication patterns. This theory is about communication patterns between people. Okay? Specifically, how do individuals use and interpret symbols to create daily reality for themselves? Kind of mysterious. You create reality for yourself. Y'all know who Oprah Winfrey is? You still know her? Anyway, she had, a big famous show years and years ago, and I remember she used to talk about creating reality all the time. I remember specifically one time she was talking about communication patterns between husbands and wives, and that we should think about just our tone of voice and think about whether we have a smile or a frown on our face, because that smile or that frown, we can interpret that symbol as being, oh no, what's wrong with you, right? And everybody's defenses are on, and maybe it can cause friction. So that's what this creating daily reality, even moment to moment reality, can be. What does our tone of voice symbolize in the words that we say in our communication pattern, right? So this is one part of it. So we use symbols like tone of voice, like body language, in addition to things that we maybe think directly of as symbols, like, a logo on clothing or a brand of a car or something like that are definitely symbols that communicate something. But the way we carry ourselves, for instance, in my Next class, on the very first day, 3 people came in and they chose seats right beside each other and then scooted the seats a little bit closer together, away from the people on either side. And what would you interpret the meaning of that to be? I didn't know these people. I didn't know who they were on my roster.
My friends.
I immediately interpreted, oh, they're friends. They either accidentally took this class together or they intentionally took this class together. I made some other assumptions. I don't even know if they're true yet. Maybe they just came, based on their age group, maybe they just came from Bryant High School or Benton High School or Bauxite High School, because I get a bunch of folks right out of those high schools. And so I don't really know whether that theory, whether that notion is correct, but their behavior, their body language scooting closer together, yeah, to me that symbolized a message. They are friends. And each subsequent day of class, when they do the same thing, yep, sure enough, they're buddies. Okay? So we can interpret reality based on behavior, based on communication patterns. How do we use language, which is a symbol, language and communication to reinforce or go against social patterns, go against social norms? Another question that a symbolic interactionist might ask. It's a micro-level theory, so I want to look at the you and me level, but maybe I want to look at the you and me level to tell me, look, is the you and me level a reflection of larger social trends? Or is the you and me level contributing to changing social trends across the board? For instance, well, you give me a for instance. How are things perhaps different because your age group made them different through your interaction every day? How are they different from, say, I guess we were using grandma as an example in class last week. Has society changed over time? Society does change over time, absolutely. How does it change? A symbolic interactionist would say it changes because people's behavior, communication patterns on a one-on-one small group, the resources that we have in society, the way that we communicate has changed. When I was little, I'm talking about like 6, 7 years old, y'all probably have seen it in old movies, but there used to be a telephone attached to the wall with a receiver on it. You had to pick it up and it was a cord, right? Ours was green. Ours was called avocado green. It was in our kitchen. There were 2 of them. There was one in my parents' room and one in the kitchen. Okay? And so my father would call his mother, and she was just an hour and 30 minutes away. But my father would call his mother once a month, and he would talk to her for just a few minutes, and he would line all of us up, and we'd get the phone, and we'd say, "Hi, Granny, I love you, bye. Hi, Granny, I love you, bye. Hi, Granny, I love you, bye." As fast as we could, because that stuff's expensive. Something called long distance. Have y'all ever heard of that before? You know, you have long distance now, but it's part of your data plan, right? Now you can text, and it's unlimited talk and text for, you can call Germany in some cases without having any kind of extra fee. So communication patterns have changed quite a lot. There's always been a phrase that it's a small world. Well, here's a question that symbolic interactionists might ask. Is it a smaller world now, perceptually, symbolically, because we can get on a multiplayer video game and have people in South Korea and Japan and Germany and Africa, anywhere, in our little group, and we're communicating one-on-one, but you're in Germany and I'm in Jackson, Mississippi, for instance. So symbolic interactionism, while you look at the you and me level, it gives you an opportunity to see whether you and me level communication patterns, are they a reflection of old standard social facts in society, or are they a reflection of how perhaps social facts and norms in society will change over time? How do people make bonds? How do people distribute work? How do people within a household create the reality of their daily existence? Who does this work and who does that work? Is there still, for instance, an old phrase, is there still such a thing as women's work in the household and man's work in the household? There might kind of still be. Like if I say taking out the garbage, whose job is that? The man's job. It's everybody in my house now too, but we have some people say, well, it's everybody in my house, but some people say, well, it's the man's job. Well, how about grilling? Is that the man's job? What about just cooking in general? That's the woman. Right. So, okay. Well, we can debate about this, right? I mean, we can look at trends across the board in society. 60 years ago, 100 years ago, what were the trends? What were the social expectations? And therefore, how did people react to those macro scale social trends and expectations and create daily reality? Put your phones away. Yeah, put your phone away. Everybody make sure it's on silent too, by the way. I forgot to remind you of that. We don't want it to wake us up too much if it rings unexpectedly. Okay? So yeah, we can look at how macro scale trends existed 100 years ago, and is there a reflection in the lifestyle that we can, read about 100 years ago that daily reality for people on an individual level reflected that macro scale pattern? And today, well, everybody does that in my house. Me too. But that wasn't that way 50 years ago, 100 years ago, right? So we can look at these micro-scale patterns and see perhaps predict future macro-level trends. What do you think? Does it make sense? Okay. Questions? So your job will be to, number one, be able to explain all three of these, okay? We kind of put them all together and explained all three of them today. So your job will be to explain all three of these, but you will probably notice as we pass through this particular unit, which is 3 chapters, chapter 1 through 3, the reading assignment that I gave you last week, I guess. So you will notice as you're completing that reading assignment, in each chapter there will be short sections on functionalism and how does a functionalist look at that particular topic that we're studying. Social conflict theory, how do we look at that topic? This, how do we look at that topic? Okay? So as you are reading and as we continue to discuss new and different things in sociology class, you will probably choose one or another, or maybe a combination of two, because this one often is used in combination with another perspective, since we can look at macro scale trends with this one. It doesn't have to be used in combination with another, but it often is. So you will probably like one or another better, or you might like the idea to combine two to come up with conclusions. So it is, and you can, talk about those conclusions, talk about how you came to those decisions in your reaction paper. It would be a great idea, in my opinion, to choose a quick review of all three of these particular perspectives for your reaction paper this week. If you do that, you'll be way more prepared for the test when it comes around, and you'll zip through those questions because, oh yes, there will be questions about this kind of stuff. Multiple choice or essay or anything in between. Promise. Yes, sir?
So, say you were looking at a specific social enclave.
Okay.
That would be micro-level, sort of.
Well, you say a particular, you use the word enclave, and when I heard you say particular social enclave, immediately my mind went to categories of people and that definition for that term that we just got, which is a macro scale thing. So I guess you're going to have to tell me what you mean by enclave. if I look at this group, which is 25 students and me, this is a micro-scale situation. Later in the cafeteria, there might be 25, 30 people sitting in the cafeteria, but are all of you interacting with each other? There might be like 2 or 3 here, 4 or 5 here, 1 here looking at something on YouTube or whatever. There's interaction taking place in all of those tables, but it's like 3 different examples of micro-scale interaction.
So I'm talking about like Chinatown or some like place in San Francisco where it's
Okay, good. Yeah, you're getting so like Little Italy in New York, or Chinatown in San Francisco or New York, some kind of neighborhood that typically has a cultural characteristic to it, right? And there's boundaries, right? We're actually talking about this a little bit in my geography class right now, these different boundaries within a city. So anyway, yeah, those, now I know what you mean by enclave, like a neighborhood with cultural characteristics, like a region where people share similar social characteristics. So that's going to be a category of people who live there, right? And then within it, the micro-scale interaction will reflect the overall social norms that are expected within that category of people.
so that would be macro level.
You can apply both perspectives, yes. Yes, because a category of people shares similar social characteristics. So for instance, if the same ethnicity, the same culture, the same food habits, the same gender roles, the same, matches the residents of Chinatown, to use your example, then that's a category of people within a larger social structure. That's macro scale. And then within it, you can see the way perhaps children interact with their parents, because children who are interacting with other categories of people in school, for instance, maybe go against what their parents' traditional Chinatown ways were. For instance, I'm making this up off the top of my head, but that interaction could show changes in attitudes, changes in behaviors that you could predict, for changes in overall social structure moving forward as those children become adults.
You're looking at the entire country on a macro level scale, like you're examining the different
Categories of people within it.
With that, would they be micro level?
No.
On that level, it's just macro.
Yeah, because if you're looking at an entire population of Chinatown,
Okay.
there's your entire population. Now, Chinatown might be one small section of population in New York City, and it is, right? But it's still one category of people within New York City, which is our whole society that we're looking at. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I realize now what question you were asking me, and we kind of got to the answer a little bit long. But yes, if you're looking at an entire thing, so Benton, Arkansas is not a very large town in the grand scheme of things. But if I'm interested in studying a particular behavior or pattern or trend about people in Benton, then that's the society as a whole that I'm studying. Does that make sense? And I can gather information, some cases, through a symbolic interactionist method where I want to observe this particular Bible study group at this particular church and determine their attitudes and ideas. Or everybody who happens to be at, the movie theater on a Saturday night and, and study their attitudes and ideas. Collectively, I get the trend I want to see in Benton. Make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about doing sociological research, and that will finish up chapter 1. So as of today, we will finish up chapter 1. So in your reading assignment that I know all of y'all are keeping up with, that's what you did last night, right? You didn't watch TV. Did your reading assignment on Super Bowl Sunday? Anyway, yes, Veronica did. Anyway, so you should be, if you're keeping up with your reading assignment, so you don't have to cram it all in, the day before the test is due, then you should be finished by today with your chapter 1 portion of your reading assignment. Okay, so that's how your reading assignment will work. You'll always get at the beginning of like a new unit after we've had a test, and I'm going to group the next 3 chapters together. You'll get the reading assignment for all those chapters. And then you need to keep up with it according to how quickly or slowly we're moving through stuff in class. Okay? Oh, I'm a big hit in the hallway. Okay, so remember the definition of sociology starts off with what? What word does it start off with? Systematic. Systematic is the word that it starts off. It is a study. It's a systematic study because we use the scientific method. And I think I mentioned on day one, it's the same old scientific method that your chemistry teacher is using and your biology teacher is using and your 5th grade science teacher is using or used when they told you were going to do a science project that year. Okay, so we are a social science. We have a systematic way of studying people. We use the scientific method. I don't know if I heard some sighing that was like, oh, the scientific method, I don't want to go over this again. And if I did hear that, then don't worry, we're not going to go through the entire, all the steps of the scientific method again. There's a beautiful chart in your textbook someplace in the reading assignment that goes through that for you. I don't know what page it's on. Anybody know? Anyway, where you formulate your hypothesis, you determine whether there's already been research done about it, and you gather all the information, and you look at it, and you determine your research style. What is the best way to formulate your research? What method are you going to use to collect the information that you need in order to get valid and reliable data? And it's the research method part of the scientific method that I want to talk to you about today, because in a social science, you have some special considerations to make when you're choosing how are you going to set up your research model, because we're studying humans. And what did we say humans, what kind of problem did we say humans cause in our research? Did I say this? It might have been my other face-to-face class that I said this to. Okay, well, I don't want to shatter anyone's perceptions of reality, but we aren't always truthful with the image that we portray. We aren't always truthful in our answers. And so since we, as social scientists, want to study humans, we have to be really careful selecting the research method that we use, because if we select a research method that brings about inaccurate information or lies, frankly, that does it give us any kind of accurate data that we can use to make, no, I see lots of people shaking their head, no. So the part of the scientific method that we want to look at is research models. Research models. Okay. You have undoubtedly heard of an experiment, right? Okay. So experiments are a commonly known of research model using the scientific method. Experiments usually have control groups. They usually have variables that you introduce into the experimental group that you don't introduce into the control group, and you make observations moving forward. And in biology and chemistry, sometimes in social science, under certain circumstances, in psychology often, they will use experimentation as a research model. But because you are human beings and you have rights, I have to tell you that you're going to be a part of an experiment, and you have to agree to participate in that experiment, and therefore only certain personality types are probably going to agree, and other personality types are going to be like, no way, I'm leaving. And we have this other issue that people don't always tell the truth, or people don't always behave in truthful ways. Think about your own behavior. If you've been at work with your coworkers, you're all acting one way, and then all of a sudden your supervisor shows up. Does your behavior change at least a little because the supervisor's there, right? Does your behavior change a little from being with your group of friends to when you're at your grandma's house? Yes. So your behavior changes based on when you know who is watching and why they are watching, right? And that is called. So let me write a little bit more on the board so you have a little bit more in your notes. So experiments are great. They are a standard research model, but they are problematic for social scientists, such as us. They are problematic because you have to disclose to people, hey, this is an experiment. Do you want to participate? And some people are going to say sure. Some people are going to say and that already excludes like a wide variety of people. And other issues, there is a term called the Hawthorne effect. And that Hawthorne effect is the tendency for people to behave differently when they know they're being watched. What'd you say about customer service? I think I heard.
When I used to work at Target,
Yeah.
and they always give me the phone I hate because I always turn in my little
Your customer service voice.
it's like fake voice, and
Yeah.
they're like, okay, you take the phone.
A fake voice, yes, for customer
And then-
service.
and you-
I knew those customer service people weren't always sincere with their
And it's like,
friendliness.
I used to pick up the phone and then my voice would change. I'm like,
Yeah. Exactly. Or I have a lot of students who can observe this. So for instance, I had a lady who worked at not Waffle House, what's it called? IHOP one time, 24 hours, and she would get the overnight shifts at a time when elderly people would come like at the first part of her shift, and then young people would come like at as they were ending their day after maybe out partying or something, and they come and eat at IHOP. And she said that that she wasn't being watched necessarily by a researcher, but she viewed each of her tables as people who were judging her because she wants to make money in tips. And so you have to present yourself in a certain way so you can get the best tips from the older group, the older category. You have to present yourself in a certain way to get the best tips from the younger category. Have you been there before? Yeah. Right. So you know this, right? So you behave a different way when you know you're not even part of a scientific research model. You behave a different way from one daily circumstance in your life to the next. Symbolic interactionists observe this all the time. You put on a different costume. None of you came here today in like a tuxedo and an evening gown or Speedos or a bikini. Those are not the costumes that are appropriate for this particular reality that we're sitting in right now, right? So we constantly adjust ourselves anyway for the audience that we have. And the Hawthorne effect, it was observed by a fellow named Hawthorne, which is why he got his name on this. But he observed that when people know they're being watched, they don't give you their true selves, their true reaction, and therefore your data is skewed. So experiments can be done in social science. It's just not as common in sociology as these other types I'm about to tell you about. Did your hand go up?
I was just going to ask, what about the biases of the researchers?
Absolutely, good. You asked about bias of the researchers. I'm going to talk about that in this next phase, because you have to be very, very, very careful. Whether you're setting up an experiment in biology lab or chemistry lab, you have to really worry about the fidelity or the bias that could be introduced from even just if it's a chemical reaction you're looking at. Have you isolated it to make sure you know only these chemicals are in this situation right there, right? Or you could bias all of your results. So the bias is something you absolutely have to consider. The researcher might be biased also, but in social science, we're really, really careful about knowing that we have to try to identify our own biases, and I have to ask many colleagues, not only social scientist colleagues, but colleagues in the engineering department or in the culinary school or in lots of other departments who aren't as close to sociology as I am and my immediate colleagues, to put their eyes on my research model to say, hey, am I too close to this because I created it to see this glaring error that you, who aren't so close to it, can see clearly because you have a different set of trained eyes. So we have to be really careful about that all through this, right? Okay. So, let me this part. So a lot of times what we do in social sciences is we use surveys or we use participant observation. Surveys or participant observation. There's lots of different kinds of ways that you can compose a survey. Questionnaires that people fill out. That people fill out privately. Or interviews that happen, it's a sit down. I have some predetermined questions, but I want to sit down with you and talk to you about it and get your answers in person. And sometimes questionnaires can be done in person also. I think it was my other face-to-face class where somebody asked a question about how would you decide what kind of research to do. And the question of bias came up, like you were just asking, Max, and not only in the researcher, but also in the way we write the questions. So, for instance, if I'm a researcher and I want to know about cheating behavior in college students, cheating is not a behavior it's not seen as acceptable, right? It's not seen as acceptable by teachers and the administration. But studies show that many, almost all college students cheat from time to time, if not all the time, as a strategy to get through school. Studies have shown this for decades and decades. So we here at UAPTC are not unique, but we have a student code of conduct and it talks about plagiarism and cheating and all these penalties that you'll get if you don't earn your own work. People still do it. We find techniques to get around these things so I don't get caught, right? And it's a strategy to be successful that many students admit that they use on a regular basis to get through school. That's a sensitive topic, though. Am I going to get you to admit that cheating is part of your regular strategy to be successful in college? If I stand with my iPad outside the doors of these classrooms and in between classes, I ask you to stop and answer a few questions. Do you cheat in school? How many times would you say you have cheated in school? And is this a normal thing? Or, are you going to necessarily be honest with me when I'm face to face, looking you in your eyeballs? No. So it depends on what topic you're trying to find out information about, and that's going to inform how you're going to set up your research model. So probably a privately answered questionnaire is going to be my best chance under that circumstance, my best chance to try to get truthful answers. You think? Rather than face-to-face? Rather than a sit-down interview? Yeah. Okay, so for instance, depending upon the severity or the private nature or controversy associated with a topic, you have to not only identify your own bias that might be present, have other people help you identify your own bias, but when I'm setting up my questionnaire to ask people about cheating behavior in college, I see people squirming in their seats. We need to move off this topic really quickly. But I need to also give people a way out. I don't need to write my questions as though I assume 100% of you cheat in college at least once or twice, right? I need to start this with an unbiased position. Have you ever cheated in college? Yes or no? If no, thank you, goodbye, right? But I need you to be able for you to have that out, for you to answer that question and then have the out. So you're not part of the pool, the sample that I am going to be gathering further data from. This percentage of people said no. This percentage of people said yes. Well, now I want to know a little bit more. Was it just once? What was your motivation? What was the frequency in general? Right? Get some additional information. And ask these questions privately. I'm going to be much more likely to avoid the Hawthorne effect and get you to answer truthfully. Right? What are some other topics about human behavior that might be kind of sensitive and people won't necessarily answer face to face? I heard somebody say sexual behavior. Yeah, so your sex habits, your sexual behavior, this is not stuff that we're, familiar with, just chatting about casually, right? So if I want that, and is that part of human behavior? Yes. So do sociologists study it? Yes. So, we have to choose our research model carefully. Okay, participant observation is a very common research technique for anthropologists, sociologists, cultural geographers, all of those kinds of social scientists. This word means exactly what it looks like. You are taking part, in activities that you're interested in with the group that you're interested in. And gather data from the experiences that you have and the questions that you ask other participants. Participant observation. It usually takes a long time to get accurate information with participant observation, depending upon what you're interested in. For instance, if you are interested in the ways in which undocumented people create reality and negotiate their realm of being sort of outside the dominant social structure because of being undocumented, this is a concept that would require on-the-ground field work. It would require you asking questions, maybe witnessing some situations yourself, maybe having a consultant or somebody who is paired with you in the community so that you can formulate questions and get some experiences yourself. But is this a pretty sensitive issue? Would everybody who's undocumented necessarily be wide open with you and answer your questions, or just love to see you coming? No, they're going to be distrustful probably, because the whole reason they've had to negotiate a different sort of lifestyle than somebody who is documented has is because they kind of want to stay out of the radar. And here you are, somebody who's in the radar, coming to ask questions about how do you stay out of the radar, right? So it's going to take me a long time to get comfortable with you. Maybe never. Maybe I will never be comfortable with you, so you won't get my information. But others, it will take me a long time to trust you. Okay, you've been here a while. I guess I can see from the past few months that I've seen your face around here that no major changes, no trouble has come from your presence here. And therefore, maybe I'm going to open up to you, maybe I'm going to give you a little bit more information or participate in what you're here for, trust you a little bit. So participant observation can get you some really good descriptions, qualitative information about life experiences that you can analyze later for trends or analyze for communication patterns, analyze for whatever your questions are. But it takes a whole long time. It takes a very long time to get accurate information, depending upon the issue that you're interested in. And here's where we're going to talk about people's biases again. So we can try to be unbiased, but we, as individuals, even social scientists who are trained to do these kinds of research models, we have a tendency to judge others based on our own idea of what is correct. Okay, so this is what we will close our discussion with today. What is it? We're 5 minutes slow on this clock. Do I remember correctly? I think it's 5 minutes slow.
9:02.
It's 9:02. Okay. So yeah, we will close with these two topics really quick that are related to that question of bias that you were asking earlier. And also, in general, it's not just about a researcher's bias, but it's about what we kind of learn to be skeptical about. I'll put air quotes around the word other. We're kind of skeptical, we're leery of otherness compared to ourselves. We use ourselves kind of as a measuring tool. Okay? So there are some terms for that we need to get in our notes and be able to identify when we see it. Okay, so the first term is ethnocentrism. And I'll wait to put the next term on the board after we talk about this one. Ethnocentrism. This word refers to culture. It means your culture, your habits, your way of life, your ideas, your rituals, your beliefs. That's your ethnicity. Your food ways, your style of life, the music you like, the clothes you like, those are the indicative, those are symbols of your culture. Ethnocentrism means that people tend to focus on their own culture and discount or judge harshly people who are different than themselves. It's a tendency that we all have. The tendency to judge groups using our own standards.
Yes. So it's like when I read, I think, chapter 2 towards the end, it talked about how this socialist, I think he went to go to like, it took him 3 days to get to this place.
Oh, down in the Amazon, the Yanomami,
Yeah.
at the end of chapter 2.
He said that they were ugly.
He said they were ugly and hideous and they blew their noses in their hands and stuff like that. Yeah, so there's a section, I thought it was at the beginning of chapter 2.
It's like that.
That, yes, so ethnocentrism is the tendency. Yeah, so there was a question about a passage that some of you haven't come to yet in your reading assignment, but there's like a quote from an anthropologist's field notes from his participant observation, and the comments that he made about the group he went to spend time with are really harsh in his journal. Yeah, he talks about how ugly they are and how unwelcoming they were. He used his standards for what he thought of as a welcome. You know somebody important is coming to stay with you, and why haven't you swept your floor, and why haven't you fixed me a meal, and why haven't you, why didn't you expect me in a way that I would have rolled out the red carpet for you if I knew you were coming to me. So he used his own ideas about what was correct. That's part of the definition of ethnocentrism. Well, I think this is correct. So if you disagree with me, you're wrong. And I'm going to judge you. Whether I actually have the power to impose my judgment on you and restrict your rights and privileges or something is beside the point. Sometimes ethnocentrism, in the hands of the haves, can result in disadvantages for the have-nots. But on a one-on-one level, ethnocentrism can simply separate us into different categories of people. Ethnocentrism has a positive side, because if you have patriotism, feelings of patriotism for our nation, or if you were a fan of the 49ers or the Chiefs yesterday and you rooted for them and you have a team that you really follow, your loyalty to that team, your loyalty to a country or to a brand or something like that comes from ethnocentrism also. So it has a positive side. If you have a faith that you strongly follow, that loyalty comes from ethnocentrism. But when we judge people harshly using our standards, that's when trouble can happen with ethnocentrism. For instance, y'all know where Karina's is on 65th Street by UALR? Anybody know where Karina's Taqueria is? On Sundays, they have a dish called menudo. Anybody know what menudo is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Anybody like it? What's in menudo?
Menudo is like the stomach.
Intestines, the stomach. Sometimes there's lung. Sometimes there's there's feet. Sometimes in there. There's hominy. Yeah, there's different kinds of things in here. But when I'm telling you, okay, I am seeing ethnocentric responses in some people's faces when you wrinkle it up and you're going, oh, I heard somebody say gross. I had, my birthday fell on a Sunday one year, and they have menudo on Sundays at Karina's, and so I was like, let's go to Karina's, we'll have a menudo party for my birthday, and I invited lots of people, and half of them didn't come. Because of the ingredient list, I'm assuming. As a matter of fact, some of them told me later, is like, well, I thought I would just bring you some cookies later, because I'm scared of the stomach and the lungs and the pig's feet and whatever else, the intestines and whatever else is in menudo. It was a cultural thing. They were using their own standards of behavior, not thinking about the ingredients in a hot dog. But since you could see them individually in the menudo, we're going to judge. And so this is a silly thing. I mean, we do it all the time, right? When we pass by stuff in the grocery store, I'm going to discriminate against this thing because I don't like it. Even if I've never tried it, maybe I don't like that. It just looks funny. We're going to move on to something else. Those are ethnocentric kind of reactions. And I use a silly example like what we eat, but some people are really serious about what we eat, right? You might be really, really ethnocentric about hearing that some cultures eat dogs and cats. Very common in some cultures. Some cultures, I think it's Peru that eats guinea pigs.
It's Colombia.
Colombia, is it? Maybe both, since they're neighbors. But you know, meat is meat. A friend of mine from Taiwan, little bitty tiny island nation, off the coast of China. Tiny little nation, a lot of people. It's surrounded by water. They eat so many different kinds of seafood that I can't even think of. Actually, one thing that she showed me was called a sea cucumber. It's actually an animal. It's not a vegetable. And it just looks like, I'm sorry to tell you, to me, in my ethnocentric description, it looked like a glob of Vaseline is what it looked like to me. And they eat these things. And she also told me that there is a saying in Taiwan, since it's a teeny tiny little country, they eat a whole bunch of seafood. They love meat when they can get it, but it's a tiny little country filled with mostly people. You can't have like a cattle ranch. And it's a teeny tiny little country. You have to ship stuff. It's really expensive if you get a piece of beef, really expensive if you get pork or something. They have a chicken and small things. But she said there's a saying about meat that the only thing with 4 legs that they don't eat is a table. I know, and so some of you are like, gross, or some of you are like, no, right? This is an ethnocentric feeling. And it's over a silly thing, right? Silly food examples, right? But I'm using these silly food examples as a way to show you that some things that are more important, some things that are part of basic human rights, some things that are part of freedom, for instance, freedom of an individual, we might impose our tendency toward ethnocentrism, just like some of y'all are going gross about these food examples. We have a tendency to judge others using our standards for what we think is correct, for what we think is right. And therefore, we have to really guard against this. I can't, if I'm studying you, I won't get valid information if I'm judging you the whole way. I'm judging you every step of the way. So we have to try to really guard against this. And one last thing in our last 5 minutes is something called cultural relativism. This is a research technique where we have to intentionally try to step back from ethnocentrism and try to understand a culture from an insider's point of view. no telling. Let me look at just a second and see. Yes, we try and understand. Sorry. We try and understand. Sorry, Mike. Trying to write it quickly and it doesn't do me any good because y'all can't read it. So cultural relativism. While you're doing research, you have to constantly check yourself. Did I get it wrong again? It's a research technique that requires that we try and understand a culture from their own perspective. Yeah, from their own perspective. So we have to constantly watch ourselves for ethnocentrism and constantly train ourselves to remember that just because some other culture's ways are different than mine does not mean it's wrong. And their culture is the way that it is because of their history, because of their geography, because of their background, because of their religious beliefs, right? So not all religions are the same. We're very ethnocentric. Typically, if you are a religious person, ethnocentrism is what makes you a religious person. We like our religion. We think it's correct. Many other people are of a different religion than we. So when we are researching people who are of a different belief system than we, then of course your behaviors, your rituals, your customs are probably going to be very different. And we have to constantly, as researchers, practice, not judging them, but instead trying to understand their culture from their particular perspective. Okay? So I hope you have a ton of stuff to write about for your reaction paper, and text me with questions. And that will be all for today. We'll pick up with chapter 2 in class on, when will that be? That will be